One slice of pizza might be responsible for the industry as we know it. Let's explore how Pacman changed gaming. Most people think they know everything there is to know about Pacman. Hungry yellow disc, eats dots, runs away from ghosts. But as we approach Pacman's 40th birthday, it's worth reminding ourselves that he's more than just a mascot. In terms of developmental firsts, Pacman did far more for the industry than many of us realise. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in this video. We'll look at how the voracious, phasmophobic Puck was the originator of loads of stuff we now take for granted. Things like power-ups, cutscenes and even stealth, but also how Pacman indirectly played a part in the creation of games as diverse as Doom to Super Mario Bros. But before we get started, if you are new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you know when our next video lands. But right now, let's look at the many ways Pacman changed gaming. To start with, we need to look at where Pacman came from. This is one of those bits of tech history that most gamers are vaguely aware of. Way back in 1979, 27-year-old Namco employee Toru Iwatani got the idea for Pacman while staring at a pizza with a single missing slice. Suddenly, he wasn't looking at food. He was looking at a creature that needed to eat and not be eaten. It inspired him to create Pakuman, a name derived from the Japanese phrase paku paku tabaru, onomatopoeic slang used to describe the sound a mouth makes when it opens and closes. The Japanese game was famously renamed Pacman before this was also changed by US distributors Midway on account of it being far too easy to vandalize by changing the P to an F, because yes, that would be a completely different game. And the fact that Pacman was inspired by pizza is appropriate. The idea of Pacman consuming food to gain power is apparently derived from spinach-munching cartoon hero Popeye. And that sort of means we can thank Pacman for establishing food as a means of getting more powerful in games, which is something we see everywhere, from the trash can chicken of Final Fight to the tantalizing fast food of Yakuza. Being the first maze chase game might not seem like a big deal now. What even is a maze chase game, you probably ask? But that's a bit like laughing at Alexander Graham Bell while you watch this video on your phone. Pacman's success led to an explosion of similar titles in the years that followed, including Snack Attack, Dig Dug and more. Even Pacman's semi-sequel, Ms. Pacman, was inspired by an attempt by US distributor Midway to follow up on the success of the arcade title with their own game, which began life as something called Crazy Otto. More on that in the next entry. But the really big thing here is that the 2D original also inspired 3D versions of the same concept, such as Monster Maze, Spectre and early first-person shooters, and you can probably see where this is going. Doom developer and general gaming legend John Romero cites Pacman as one of the biggest influences on his career, to the point that there's even a Pacman level in Wolfenstein 3D. So without Pacman we might not have had Doom, and without Doom, well, life as we know it would probably be unrecognisable, so let's try not to think about it. You might think that attempts to court the broadest possible demographic of gamers is a relatively new thing, but perhaps it's time to stop thinking that. Pacman was specifically designed to help break boundaries, whether they were generational or gender-based. Every aspect of its creation was designed to make playing video games more socially acceptable. The aggressive elements of more militaristic coin-ops were swapped out in favour of the universal appeal of eating. The cute ghosts were even designed to appeal to a Japanese female audience. The fact that Pacman was a mascot also helped. Until now, video games didn't really have a face. But now, there was a crisp, marketable character associated with the burgeoning hobby. I'm not saying that without Pacman we wouldn't have the likes of Lara Croft or Sonic, but this is where that seed was planted. This broad audience also influenced the sequel. Ms. Pacman began life as an enhancement kit for Pacman called Crazy Otto, created by programmers employed at the General Computer Corporation. US distributor Midway, growing tired of waiting for Namco to release a sequel, purchased the rights to Crazy Otto and repurposed it as a follow-up. It was initially renamed Super Pacman, but this was changed to Pac-Woman in an attempt to further court that large female player base. The name was changed again to Miss Pacman, but this was ditched to avoid confusion about their relationship when a stork delivers a little baby Pacman Jr. in the game's third intermission. So it was changed again to Mrs. Pacman and then finally to Miss Pacman because it was easier to say. So over the course of just 2 weeks, the name went from Crazy Otto to Super Pacman to Miss Pacman to Mrs. Pacman to Ms. Pacman.
Well done!
Again, this one might feel like a stretch. It's not like Pacman is popping out of boxes or distracting ghosts with weaponized horse manure. But look at it in context and you can see the stealth elements that Pacman helped establish. This was the first instance of a hero avoiding their enemies rather than fighting them. Until now, most action games had a combative edge, but Pacman managed to subvert this. Yes, you could get revenge on the ghosts that chased you, and we'll talk about that next, but it was an ephemeral thing. Most of the time, you're playing hide and seek with phantoms, which is sort of terrifying if you think about it too hard. It also gave us line of sight mechanics. Ghosts only give chase when they've seen Pacman, which makes chomping down on that eventual power pellet even more satisfying. This is what you get, Clyde. This is what you get. And that brings us neatly onto the biggie. It seems so rudimentary now that it's barely worth mentioning. Once you eat a power pellet, the hunter becomes the hunted as you turn the tables on your spectral oppressors. The very idea of a power-up is so ubiquitous in games that it's hard to pinpoint a single vivid example because they're everywhere. It's so well known, in fact, that the Pacman defense is a business strategy used to stave off hostile takeovers, which is a vivid, if not altogether accurate depiction of corporate acquisitions. But at the time, nobody had done anything like this. First off, it represented a dynamic change in play, briefly changing the flow and direction of the game. Pellets could be used tactically by drawing the ghost towards you, giving players a sense of agency that made every level play out differently. And those brief moments of empowerment became part of a satisfying, deeply repetitive gameplay loop. It's something we've talked about in our gaming psychology videos, that fleeting sense of being in control is enough to keep us playing even if we can technically never win. It's the reason we keep playing Fortnite, Destiny and a billion other titles, and Pacman did it first. Next we've got the cutscene, and yes, I am being 100% serious. It's scarcely possible to imagine games without them, whether it's the relentless cinematic narrative of something like Metal Gear Solid or the swaggering action movie bravado of Devil May Cry. And truthfully, someone somewhere would probably have popularized the idea if it wasn't for Pacman, and in fact, Space Invaders Part 2 had already employed a similar between-level intermission back in 1979. But you're not watching a video about Space Invaders Part 2 because it didn't change the landscape of gaming. These little animations between levels are a further reminder of all the groundbreaking things present in the Namco coin-op. It's a way of imparting more personality into characters that would otherwise be blob-like voids. And it's an endearing palate cleanser before you dive back into the relentless, pill-chomping murk of a new level. Our final entry is an unusual one because it's more of a knock-on effect caused by Pacman's roaring success. By 1982, 400,000 cabinets had been sold in the US alone. Pacman remains the highest-grossing arcade game of all time, having taken over $2.5 billion by the 1990s. But when home console manufacturer Atari tried to swiftly capitalize on that success, things went very, very wrong. CEO Ray Kassar licensed the game for the Atari VCS with an extremely short development time in order to hit shops in time for Christmas 1981. The resulting game, actually only released in 1982, is a disaster, stripping away everything wonderful from the original. Atari was so confident of its success that they manufactured 12 million cartridges, and they still had 5 million cartridges left when the game stopped selling and consumers started asking for refunds. Worse still, Atari followed this up with the disastrous ET conversion, contributing towards a huge crash in the home console market that many experts saw as the end of the consumer's appetite for video games. Thankfully, we know they were wrong.
The cleansing of Earth is a necessary step on the path to a brighter tomorrow.
And finally, as an added bonus, we've got Pacland. The side-scrolling follow-up is one of the few sequels that creator Toru Iwatani was directly involved with, and it's the often forgotten foundation of many platforming games that followed. The likes of Ghosts and Goblins, Alex Kidd, and Wonder Boy all owe a creative debt to Pacland. But most notably of all, Iwatani is on record saying Shigeru Miyamoto told him Pacland was the direct inspiration for the original Super Mario Bros. So there's that as well. So there you go. Next time you see pixels pop up in your Watch Next queue, spare a thought for the legendary yellow disc that got us where we are today. Truly an icon worth celebrating. Give this video a like if you've got a newfound respect for Pacman, and subscribe to Logitech G for more deep diving looks at the games industry. And while you're at it, why not ring that notification bell so you know when our next video lands.